Hello, everyone. My name is Laurie Pasteryak, and I am the Director of Interpretation at the Fairfield Museum and History Center in Fairfield, Connecticut. This video is the actually third episode of a three-part series on the Pequot War of 1636, 1637, and 1638. And you can access the first two episodes through the Fairfield Museum's website, www.fairfieldhistory.org, which will bring you to our YouTube channel where the other two episodes, the first two, are. So again, this is part three of a three-part series on the Pequot War. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about the consequences, the memory, and the legacy of the war and the events. And so the Fairfield Museum and the community that we serve actually sits on the homeland of the native Saskwa, Umpqua, Pequannock, and Pegusset peoples and their ancestors. We are not actually on the homeland territory of the Pequot tribe and the Mashantucket Pequot tribal nation and the Eastern Pequot Nation. But through historical research and exhibits and programs, as well as partnerships, the Fairfield Museum seeks a better understanding of our region's Native past, present, and future, as well as the legacies of other Native American tribal nations in the region. Like many New England towns, the town of Fairfield was established in the aftermath of the Pequot War, which was a violent conflict, and as well included as well as the subjugation of Native people by Europeans. But we do believe that bringing people together to better understand this very complex history and the legacy of an event like the Pequot War, that we can create a more empathetic and equitable community for all. And the memory and legacy of the Pequot War, as well as how we memorialize it and how we understand its consequences in terms of American history, is one of the most important understandings that we can come away with an event like the Pequot War, and how it is remembered, how its memories were brought to this day. And so if we're going to understand that, we need to know that the Pequot War, number one, and its events, it was one of the most influential activity or events in history, especially locally here in Fairfield. The war forever changed the political and social landscape of southern New England. Its events, specifically the massacre and or battle at Mystic Fort, which took place in May of 1637, demonstrated to essentially kind of all Native peoples and nations that the English and the Europeans had no fear of waging total war against Native peoples. The results created a power vacuum, especially in the Pequot homeland, where you had the Narragansett, the Mohegan, and the Niantic, as well as the English and even the Dutch understanding of what's happening. And the 40-50 years that followed of setting off other series of intertribal and English warfare of people trying to negotiate an understanding in a new culture and a new society in this post-Pequot War really culture that started to develop. And other Native nations like the Narragansett and the Mohegan worked hard to establish dominance in the region. And you also had Europeans settling towns, developing these fledgling towns in places like Pequot or Groton, today Mystic, as well as the town of Fairfield. And so when we think about how the Pequot War is remembered and then how it was ingrained with not only the beginnings of New England's more styled towns throughout Connecticut, we have to understand the legacy of the war as well as how people remembered it. So memory refers to processes that are used to acquire and store and later retrieve information we need. We have to almost file through our memory banks to understand how to recover information that we learned or experienced. And naturally, it's a flawed process. And so how was the Pequot War documented, and how people started to write down those memories are some of the most important reasons of what we know about the Pequot War today. So one of those ways that people actually document memories is writing things down. And what you're looking at here is one of examples of how the Pequot War was documented and or remembered. This is the first page of a primary resource called, which was written by Lieutenant Lyon Gardner, who was the head of Saybrook Fort, which is now today Old Saybrook. And it's really how Old Saybrook remembers the Pequot War. All of the events of the Pequot War are very much remembered and very particularly in their memory to the communities and things that happened there. So the Pequot War is very much in the memories of people in Old Saybrook through the fact that there was a fort there that was attacked and besieged by Pequot people and led by this man, Lieutenant Lyon Gardner. So primary resources are one of those ways that, number one, the memories of someone is documenting the war. This was actually written, Lyon Gardner wrote this in 1660, and so his memories are nearly 23, 25 years later post the war. So he's, an elder when he's writing these events down. So we have to remember that his memory is flawed. And he's writing this for a specific reason. So that's one example of how we document things. Another way that we document events, and this in particular is the Pequot War. This is a woodcut that was printed in one of the Pequot War primary resources, and it does depict the massacre or the battle at Mystic Fort in 1637. You can see the palisade wall looks like a series of interlocking circles. The wigwams in lines inside the fort, it's a stylized version. You can see the native allies and the English on the outside. Captain Underhill and Captain Mason's actually troops are denoted as well. And you can see the fields of corn and the things that denote kind of walking into or entering into Pequot country in their experience. And this is in particular, and number again, a stylized version in art that is documenting this event in time and is very specific to one of the major events of the Pequot War. So this artistic rendering of this consequential event is one of those things that people use to remember and memorialize an event. People also talk to people and interview people and document oral histories. So this particular map of Groton, stylized map, we'll say, it was actually done in 1740 by Ezra Stiles. And it's actually documenting where the fort was that Mason burnt. So he's talking again about the Battle of Mystic Fort. And he's talking to people on the ground, and he's drawing handheld or hand-done maps to document these things. So there's oral histories and interviews and traditions. But again, these are memories that are passed down over time. That really gets into legacy, right? So memories are different than legacies. Legacies is something that are handed down from one generation to the next. For example, thinking about the legacies that we like to leave in our life. How do we want people to remember us? So this interview and this map is documenting how the community, or who Ezra Stiles was talking to at the time, of how they wanted to remember this event. They were putting it in place, they were putting it in time, and they're telling him their memories. They're creating a legacy of the Pequot War. And Gardner did this in his narrative and his document as well. But it's really important to understand the difference between a memory and someone leaving and or documenting and or perpetuating a legacy of a particular perspective of event in time. So another example of how we document something and how we maybe portray something from history is another example of art. This is a screenshot from Don Troiani, who is a Connecticut artist, of actually, I believe it is Saybrook Fort's men. So this is what it was believed to have looked like. This isn't a photograph, it's a piece of artwork that was done 350 years later, but it's something that's done to document history and what it may have looked like at the time. It looks very different than our European style and or American style military today, but it's something, again, that is created to document something that happened later in time. It's using memories and descriptions from what someone like Lieutenant Lyon Gardner wrote about. It's using collections from museums to understand what it may have looked like, and it's portraying a very particular moment in time in the most, what was hoped to be described, accurate way. But it's a piece of artwork. Another way that we remember events and or things and or memorialize things is by, the artifacts that survive. And these examples here are actually projectile points, arrowheads that are brass. Some are conical, some are flat. And these points are actually from the battlefield at Mystic Fort, the massacre at Mystic. And that gets into, offering, again, so we have an oral history, we have a document, a primary document, and we also have the actual artifacts in place that are there to bring the memories forward of the war. And that is a different way to portray and or understand the consequences of an event like the Pequot War. Oftentimes, we know the quote, history is told by the winners. And archaeology and artifacts often bring forth kind of a study of material culture that, of course, is flawed because all of our perspectives are flawed. But we can certainly start to begin to understand three different triangles of how events happened, and archaeology is something that is in place. And again, that's very specific to each site and each event of the Pequot War and how the community is sharing that story. So this in particular, the Pequot War, there are several monuments and or memorializations of the war where it happened. This particular memorial and or statue, which is a conversation that is happening a lot in today's news, is of Major John Mason, Captain Mason, and it was erected in the 1880s. At the top of Pequot Hill in Mystic, Connecticut. It is no longer there. The monument was moved in the 1990s to the town of Windsor. But this is a visiting group of men from, I believe, the Connecticut Historical Society at the top of Pequot Hill, visiting the site of Major John Mason's statue, which happened to be near the site of the battlefield. And what you see next to it is a recall from a farmer in the 1870s who is picking up pieces and artifacts of the battle itself. So ways that we document history are through artifacts, but they're also through these statues, which are erected in a moment of time by a particular group to convey a particular message. They are memorializing something with their placement and with their portrayal. And this in particular was Major John Mason, who eventually became governor of the colony of Connecticut, but did lead the troops in the Battle of Mystic Fort. Another way that we are memorializing the Pequot War today, which is a project that was started by the Mashantucket Pequot Museum and Research Center, supported time and time again by the National Park Service American Battlefield Protection Program, is the Battlefields of the Pequot War Project. And this is something that the Fairfield Museum and History Center has worked with over the last several years to document and understand the landscape and the battlefield of the Battle of Monocomic Swamp, or the Battle of Pequot Swamp here in Fairfield and Southport. So the Battlefields of the Pequot War is really about informing the public about the Pequot War and the preservation of its battlefields. So we don't necessarily mean the physical preservation of the battlefields, but really about preserving the memory of the battlefield itself. So often history, as well as its memory and the legacies that are ingrained over several generations and hundreds of years, tends to lose its place. And it's really important to understand that these are physical events There were perspectives. There were many individuals who participated in the Pequot War. In fact, there were thousands of people, Native and English and even Dutch, that participated in the Pequot War. And it's an important, using that, triad of number one, oral history, archaeology, and primary resources to be able to document the war and put it in place and to be able to educate the public in order to understand different perspectives of the Pequot War and to educate everybody for the future to be able to understand what happened and why and what we can learn from it. So as we memorialize and or help share this history or help share different perhaps perspectives from the archaeology through the battlefields of the Pequot War project on the ground here in Fairfield in Southport, we're starting to understand what that meant in place. And this is a great example of where that actually took place and how we can future tell this history in beyond the primary source, beyond the statue, beyond the actual information that's shared via oral history and in the primary resources, is that we can understand what actually took place and place it on the physical landscape. And this is an example of what the battlefield boundaries are for the Battle of Pequot Swamp or Monocomic Swamp here in Fairfield. And so the museum, the Fairfield Museum, is really looking forward to understanding how we can help preserve the memories of the Pequot War, whether they be through artifacts in place on a landscape, in primary resources, through oral history, and how the town has really looked at these things over time. And as we move forward in this research process, in this education process, we're looking forward to working with, the Fairfield Public Schools, as well as our cultural partners across the Fairfield community to help share this information about the Pequot War. And with that, I would like to thank you for joining me on this 3-part series. Again, my name is Laurie Pasteryak, and I'm the Director of Interpretation here at the Fairfield Museum and History Center. And we're looking forward to acknowledging all of the perspectives and memories and history of the Pequot War through future programs, events, and exhibits with the Battlefields of the Pequot War team, as well as the Mashantucket Pequot Museum and Research Center. If you have any questions, feel free to either comment, send us an email. You can contact us through our website, www.fairfieldhistory.org. And again, the first 2 parts of this 3-part series are all available on our YouTube channel. Thank you, and I look forward to hearing from you soon.